I had written this arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner, and there were it was for a men's quartet, but there was like 6 or 8 of us that got together and learned it. And it's still to this day, I think, one of the best things I've ever written. Oh. And I remember really wanting you to be there because there's a really high part in it. And I don't remember who ended up singing it, but we kind of went all over the place. I don't know if you were aware, but there was candlelight vigils everywhere for a long time, weeks and weeks. I remember, Sean Perry was one of the people, and I think maybe Paul Kanan, and we went around singing this thing and just random hymns also. We would like kind of stand on the corner and just sing, and we thought that we were like, offering support and consolation. And saying that now, it sounds like the dorkiest, dumbest thing in the world, but it was totally normal, and people loved it, and people would sit there and listen to us and cry. And I remember going down to Union Square, which was sort of ground zero for all the like survivors or the families of victims. Union Square was the place where everybody met and lit candles, and it had like little wreaths and shrines to their beloved who were missing, because there was still a recovery effort, and we, as a nation, believed that there were probably people trapped under all that rubble and that were going to be saved. Or at least we wanted to believe that. And I would see hundreds of people, on the ground, with their faces in the dirt, pleading and sobbing to God that their loved ones would be returned. And I remember thinking, they're not going to get what they're praying for. They're not. None of them are going to get what they're praying for. And they're also not going to get any understanding. And all that's going to happen is that people are going to learn that their prayers are not answered. And I remember that just making me totally sad. But also, I couldn't see any wisdom in it. And I was so bugged by the stories that people would tell in sacrament meeting about, I was supposed to be in that building, but my train was running late, and so I was protected by the hand of God from being in those buildings, and so I didn't die. And I remember being so annoyed by that, because, what does that say about the people who did die? It was God's will that they die. God made their train run on time so that they would be in the building, so that they would die. It just seems so arbitrary. And all those beautiful firefighters who ran into the building trying to save people and who were then killed. What, that was God's will? The typical Mormon response to these kinds of temporal injustices is that it'll all get sorted out in the next life, and that justice happens in the next life, and after the judgment, or everything gets sorted out. And I remember that just being so unsatisfying. So totally unsatisfying. And if that's the case, then we can't use any of these other testimony building experiences about people's lives being saved as testimony building, because they're not. Either God answers prayers or he doesn't. Either what happens in this life is meaningful or it's not meaningful, and it's all just going to get cleared up in the wash in the next life. We can't have it both ways. And I feel like I remember thinking that it was a logical conundrum for people to, on one hand, claim, oh, God did answer my prayer, and thus this is testimony building, and then other people to say, well, God didn't answer my prayer, but it's all going to get sorted out in the wash in the end, and so it is also testimony building. So, it just...
So what does it matter what happens?
Nothing matters. It's all testimony building. No matter what I do, no matter what the outcome, no matter what God chooses to do or not do, it's all testimony building. And that reminded me a lot of a magic trick that I used to do. When I was a kid, I loved magic. And there's this magic trick that you do where you get somebody to pick a card, and you know where the card is in the pile through some trick. And then you set up these different piles, and you get them to pick the various, pick
right.
2 piles. And if they pick the right piles, then you keep those piles. If they pick the wrong piles, then you take the wrong piles away. So
right.
You either leave the piles or take away the piles, depending on if they're picking right or wrong. So you win no matter what. And I remember thinking that that's exactly how Mormons treated prayer. No matter what the outcome, it's testimony building. If someone dies, it's a testimony builder.
If they're saved, their prayers were answered.
If they're saved, their prayers were answered. Yeah. If they got a blessing and they were healed from cancer, then wow, blessings are miraculously effective. If they got a blessing and they still died from their cancer, well then God took them and it was their time, and He needed them in the spirit world to be a missionary, and that's also testimony building. And so it just felt like a magic trick to me. And I remember 9/11 was a huge revelation in that way, that no matter, what this will of God is so elusive and we can't know it, and it doesn't matter what His will is anyway.
Okay, so once you got that idea in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, and that was just sort of a seed that just kind of stuck there, like a thorn in my paw that started to fester. I also briefly dated the granddaughter of the prophet of Gordon B. Hinckley, and around this time, and got to meet him and spend some time with him at General Conference, and that was incredibly. I felt like I'd seen behind the curtain and saw that the wizard was just, a man. He was just a man. He was a good man, but he was a grumpy old man, and he yelled and was negative and was very different persona than he is on camera in front of General Conference. And I expected him to sort of shake my hand and care about me and sort of peer through my soul, and none of that happened, and the conversation felt a little bit. I remember him talking about people his son was saying, "Oh, they're reactivating all these people in South America. It's fantastic. The rate of people coming back to the church is great, and they're going back to the temple and everything." And President Hinckley was like, "They all go back too soon. It's all too soon. They never stay." He was really sort of negative and pessimistic about this. Someone was trying to be positive about a trend that was going on in South America, and he just shot it down immediately. It never works. They never stay. They all come back too soon. And I remember thinking, wow, that's so not full of hope and cheerfulness like you're used to seeing him. And I don't know. It was very disillusioning, very, very, very disillusioning. So that was kind of a big thing. And then I had two of my best friends left the church right around that time, and I'd gotten into some pretty intense conversations with them, Robert Cope and Kevin Rom. And I'd gotten into some big conversations with them on the phone and in person. I'd gone out and visited Kevin in LA, and we had an all-night conversation where we talked about faith and God and the church. And I remember I was still, even though part of my brain was still really doubting, in that conversation I remember really fighting for the church, but just not having the necessary ammunition to stand up for it anymore. And they had really great arguments, which I don't know if I remember what they were, but they were pretty successful in making me see things another way.